Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Kalamata, Greece on March 4th, 2025. This past weekend on March 1st, the first 6-week phase of the Gaza ceasefire expired. Under the agreement to which Israel consented, Israel was to begin withdrawing from the Philadelphi corridor on Saturday and complete its withdrawal from the corridor in 9 days. The Philadelphi corridor is a narrow 14 kilometers of land on the Palestinian side of the border between Gaza and Egypt. As Saturday approached, reports emerged that Israel had decided not to withdraw from the corridor. Instead, it demanded, in brazen breach of the ceasefire agreement, that the ceasefire be extended and that Hamas resume the release of Israeli prisoners while Israeli forces remained in the corridor. Netanyahu said the proposed temporary extension of Phase 1 would run through the Islamic holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish holiday of Passover, which ends in mid-April. He said the extension was an idea put forward by President Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. Hamas swiftly and categorically rejected Israel's violation of the agreement, and in response, the Israeli regime stopped the entry of all humanitarian aid into Gaza to pressure Hamas into accepting these new terms. Now here to discuss all of this with me is Miko Peled. Miko is an Israeli-American activist, author, and karate instructor. He's the author of the books The General's Son, The Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, published in 2012, and Injustice, The Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5, published in 2017. He also speaks frequently around the world in defense of the human rights of Palestinians, and I had the privilege of speaking in events with Miko in the past. I'm well familiar with his work, and I've learned that his primary occupation nowadays, and it's a wonderful initiative, is the founder and president of Palestine House of Freedom in Washington, D.C. I'm so happy you joined me today. Thank you, Miko.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
So, Miko, first of all, why don't you tell us, before we get into the implications of what has happened in Gaza over the last few days, why don't you tell us about the Palestine House of Freedom?
Sure, happy to. So we established the Palestine House of Freedom last year. We have a space right here in Washington, D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue with the offices and so forth. There were several ideas behind establishing this organization. First of all, the symbolism of having a space with a Palestinian flag on Pennsylvania Avenue with the name Palestine House of Freedom on the building was an important one. Palestine really didn't exist in Washington, D.C. in that way. And in a city where symbolism is everything, if you don't have a flag and your name, displayed prominently somewhere, you don't exist. So we felt that was really important. And then now what happens inside the building, our mission as the nonprofit is education. And so we've taken on what we believe is a robust approach to education through social media. We have events, we invite speakers, we have a YouTube channel with the Palestine Connect series and so forth. We're taking on, and this is just to get started. Now we're taking on a whole new approach, or a whole new additional approach, which is to canvass the city with posters and so forth on bus stops and that sort of thing. We got donations for that. And so the idea is to change the conversation in Washington, D.C. from what is decidedly, and I mean the halls of power in Washington, D.C., from what is decidedly a pro-Zionist, pro-genocide, pro-apartheid approach to the point where the discussion is how we dismantle the apartheid state and establish a free Palestine with equal rights on all of historic Palestine. And we believe that until we get to that point, nothing's going to change. As long as the approach here is the Zionist one, then we're not going to see any change. And the lives of Palestinians are cheap, and there's no guarantees for the safety and security of Palestinians, much less their rights. So we felt very strongly that this kind of an organization, this kind of prominent Palestine-centered establishment needs to exist in the space in Washington, D.C. And so that's what we're doing. That's right now.
Your description of the mandate of the organization reminded me that last month Steve Witkoff was flown over Gaza in a military helicopter, and afterwards said if they hadn't done that, he would not have known of the condition of Gaza, which seems extraordinary. And if there's any need of anybody to be educated about what is actually happening in Palestine today. It is the political elite in the United States. So I commend you for this excellent initiative. It's really needed. So I'd like to start then with what I discussed at the outset, Miko, this demand by Israel that the first phase of the ceasefire be extended, and this attempt to pressure Hamas and the other Palestinian groups, resistance groups in Gaza, to accept the demand by depriving the population, the civilian population, of all humanitarian aid. What is your reaction to this? Is Netanyahu's regime, in your opinion, trying to kill the ceasefire deal and resume the destruction of Gaza? Do you think it's simply posturing, that it's trying to extract more concessions before it eventually withdraws from the Philadelphia corridor? What do you think is going on here?
I think it's all of the above. There's a great deal of pressure, political pressure and public pressure on the government, on the Israeli government, to stop the humanitarian aid, to go back in and kill Palestinians. You hear this in the press. You hear this in the discourse among Palestinians. Among politicians within the Israeli political sphere, and you hear it in the public discourse. There's a great deal of pressure to do that. At the same time, there are also voices calling to free the hostages, and so they're trying to negotiate both things in order to maintain their coalition and maintain their power as a government. But we also know on a larger scale that Israel always violates agreements, and so I don't think it's any surprise that Israel is in violation of this agreement and will continue to violate it. And there's no question that this is right now. This is posturing, closing the Gaza Strip, stopping the humanitarian aid, which is, of course, a crime upon a crime upon a crime. I think the larger issue here needs to be an understanding that there's a concentration camp that was turned into a death camp, and that is what is known as the Gaza Strip. It needs to be dismantled. International pressure needs to be applied in order to completely dismantle the concentration camp and liberate its people so that they can travel and get the food and the resources that they need, which is in abundance throughout all of Palestine, right outside the walls and the fences that enclose them in the concentration camp.
You talked, I think quite rightly, about the pressures, the conflicting pressures to which Netanyahu's government is subject. A public opinion poll released 10 days ago by the Lazar Institute showed that only 4% of Israelis believe the objectives of the Gaza war have been fully achieved. And 2 weeks ago, or I believe it was 3 weeks ago now, the Israel Democracy Institute published a poll showing that 70% of Israelis support proceeding to the next stage of the ceasefire if the first stage is completed as agreed, which both these sentiments seem to me to place Netanyahu's government in quite a quandary. There's also reports that Netanyahu himself is ill. I've seen reports that there are significant conflicts within his own family. And earlier this month, Israel's Attorney General, he confirmed that Sarah Netanyahu, the prime minister's wife, has been under investigation since late December for alleged witness intimidation and obstruction of justice in her husband's ongoing corruption case. So what I'm wondering, Miko, is what is your assessment of the stability of Netanyahu's government? Do you believe that he remains in a fairly solid position, or do you think that he's in an unusually weak position and that the days of his government are numbered?
Oh no, he's very stable and very strong. I don't think there's any risk to his government whatsoever. By and large, he has met all the demands and the requests of his coalition partners, and these are things that he agrees on, which is this massive, horrific genocide and destruction of the Gaza concentration camp. And he's even managed to release some of the prisoners, some of the hostages, and so forth. So he's negotiating all of this very well. And I think within Israeli politics, everybody knows that he's the only grown-up. He's the only one that can run the show. So I don't think he's in any risk of losing power or being voted out or anything. I'm sure this government is going to maintain itself throughout the term, the 4-year term. And I would not be surprised if he would be reelected once they do have elections. I don't think that is the issue at all. And all the other stuff is merely gossip. Nobody takes that. Nobody cares about that really seriously. Again, I would say that the bigger problem here is that nobody takes seriously the needs of the Palestinian people. And by nobody, I mean the international community, certainly not Israel or the United States. And that is the problem. No one is negotiating for to provide guarantees for the freedom, safety, and security of the Palestinian people. There needs to be rebuilding. There needs to be hospitals needs to be rebuilt. There needs to be free and unhindered access to hospitals and medical supplies. The number of injured is I don't think it's even been tallied. I don't think there's any way to even know how many people have been injured. There's no sanitation. I mean, the situation is so severe, and the negotiations and the statements by Americans and others are always limited to this particular detail or that particular detail of how many trucks or this the Philadelphia route and all this stuff that is really minute details, and they're missing the big picture. The big picture here is that the concentration camp needs to be liberated, just like concentration camps after World War II. The Nazi concentration camp had to be liberated. Yes, they needed aid, but they needed to be liberated first and foremost so that they have free access, freedom to travel, and like I said, or access to the resources and rebuilding. That is really what should be just, the main issues here.
So since you raised the subject of liberation, I believe it's today that the leaders of the Arab states are meeting to come up with a plan, purportedly, that is going to counter the express goal of the Trump administration to, as he put it, clean out Gaza, establish a new Riviera, forcibly displace the Palestinian population to some Arab country or countries. And I've seen even reports, I don't know whether there's any credibility to them, that the Egyptian military is amassing in the Sinai. People within the Israeli political elite have expressed concerns about that. In November of last year, we had the rather unusual phenomenon of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia describing what Israel is doing as a genocide. Do you see signs that finally these Arab tyrannies that have been backed for so long by the United States might have reached the limit of their patience with what is being done to the Gaza concentration camp? Or do you think they cannot be counted upon in any realistic manner to come to the aid of the Palestinian people?
I think the only people we can count on when it comes to the Palestinian people are the Palestinian people. And sadly, they're not appropriately represented in these forums, in these gatherings. The Palestinian Authority is not equipped, nor is it legitimate authority to represent the Palestinian people. And so sadly, the Palestinian people whose needs are severe are not represented. I doubt that this gathering of the Arab leaders will come up with a plan that calls to dismantle the concentration camp, to provide freedom of movement and access to the Palestinians who live within it, to demand that Israel rebuild and pay for the rebuilding, and that eventually the apartheid state be dismantled completely in favor of a free Palestine. So, and again, anything short of that will never guarantee the needs and the safety and security and the rights of Palestinians. Nothing short of that is going to do that. And until we have guarantees for the safety and security of the Palestinian people, we're talking about and until we talk about the dismantling of the apartheid state, there's nothing to stop the attacks and the killing and the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. So unless we get to the root cause of the problem, which is the fact that Palestinians have no rights, that their lives are cheap, that nobody cares about their safety or security, until we get to that issue, then we're skirting the main issue, and we're dealing with small details that at the end of the day are not going to make a significant difference. Sure, every truck that gets in is important, but there's something much greater than that, which is allowing Palestinians to access the resources without conditions and without limitation. And again, nothing short of that, I believe, is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. So over the past 16 months, Israel has been fighting a multi-front war. In the north, it's been attacked repeatedly by Ansar Allah. There have been, as we know, serious impediments thrown up by Ansar Allah to Red Sea shipping, which has had significant impacts on the port of Eilat. Israel has now entered further into Syrian territory and may, at some point, although not until now, encounter significant resistance there. Do you think, I've heard military experts, independent military experts, say that Israel's military was constructed to fight short wars and that it wasn't designed to deal with a multi-front, longer-term conflict like this. Do you think that the condition of Israel's military is a significant factor that is affecting the decision-making of the Netanyahu government in terms of whether or not they are going to resume the war? Or do you think they feel fully confident in their ability to take up the military side of this equation again and complete the task which they set for themselves, which is the destruction of Hamas?
Well, several things. You touched on several important points here. First of all, it's not a war, it's a genocide. The second thing is, what is ridiculous about this conversation is we're talking about one of the largest and best equipped military forces, certainly in the region, if not in the world, relative to the fact that it's a small country. And they're having trouble. And this is how they talk about it too in the Hebrew press, the military. That's how they discuss it too, a multi-front war. They're dealing with 3 resistance organizations, none of which is a regular army. They were dealt a massive blow by the Palestinian fighters coming out of Gaza, a place where a glass of water is a luxury. And they were dealt a massive blow on October 7th that they still have not recovered from. The Yemeni forces, too, they're not comparable to the Israeli military, certainly not in resources, in hardware. And the same thing for the Lebanese forces, for the Hezbollah. They can't be compared to the Israeli military. And yet the Israeli military is in panic, is in complete disarray, because it has to deal with 3 resistance organizations that are under the watchful eye that can't even, they're all, these are countries that are, or at least organizations that are dealing with, with incredible economic restrictions. It's not like they can go buy weapons like Israel does, right? Or they're getting those kind of supplies. And so the Israeli military has shown itself to be incompetent, completely incompetent. And certainly they're scared, and they were hit very, very hard. They were hit very, very hard by the Palestinians coming out of Gaza. They were hit very, very hard by these forces in southern Lebanon. And of course, we know that the Yemeni forces have brought Israel to a point where the port of Eilat, which was crucial to the Israeli economy, is completely bankrupt. It's shut down. Typically in a year, they'll have 150,000, 200,000 cars imported through the port of Eilat. Since this began, not a single car, there's been no imports. Nothing has come in. So these 3 which are really, again, resistance organizations, not nearly proper armies, can't even be considered proper armies, have dealt a massive blow to this massive military force known as the Israeli military. And so, yes, they're very worried, and they suffered terrible losses economically and in manpower and so forth. So they're very, very worried about this. There's no question about that.
Right. And you mentioned, the economic impacts on the port of Eilat. More broadly, of course, the Israeli economy experienced a severe contraction after this genocide began, after October 7th. Its credit rating has been downgraded, I think, twice now. There are reports of, a major escalation in the number of bankruptcies in the country. What is your sense of the state of the Israeli economy? Is this also something that is the risk of a relapse into economic contraction is something that is a significant factor in the decision-making of the Israeli political elite? Or do you think that's something that they're perfectly prepared to deal with in terms of deciding whether or not to resume this genocide?
Well, the genocide is above everything else. So going back and continuing the killing of Palestinians is the objective number 1, is everybody's objective number 1. Everybody. I mean, some people posture and say, well, we need to bring the hostages first, then we should resume the killing. But at the end of the day, resuming the killing is the name of the game. How soon can they go back in and resume the killing? And they, of course, they portray it as though they want to get rid of this organization, that organization. Palestinians are fighting, are resisting in the Gaza Strip, but they're not going to stop. There's no way to end it. And so we know full well that even though they pretend that they're trying to destroy Hamas, it's about destroying the Palestinian people, because this was going on long before Hamas was even established. So it's not about that. And it's not only Hamas, it's the Palestinian people who are resisting and fighting, everywhere. throughout all of Palestine. And it's not going to stop, just like it hasn't stopped until they achieve their freedom and their liberty. So that is objective number one, without any question.
So let's come back to your this wonderful new organization that you're now heading in Washington, D.C. It sounds like this initiative was launched more or less around the time that we had a change of administration in Washington. We had this remarkable spectacle, which I mentioned earlier, of Trump promising to take over Gaza and do the Palestinians in Gaza the favor of sending them to some other Arab state where they would presumably be living in better conditions. That's his version of events. Then he put out this insane video on his Instagram channel, or somebody who controls his account. I mean, one of the most remarkably depraved things I've seen come out of a United States president in a long time, and that's saying something. Do you at the same time, we see all of these signs, and he's filled his cabinet up with people who are fanatically committed to the project of Palestinian dispossession. But at the same time, there has been a ceasefire in effect since the day before he took office, which the Biden administration either was unwilling or unable to orchestrate. Do you see a change in policy of the United States government towards the genocidal policies of the Israeli government, or do you think it's just more a matter of style rather than substance?
I mean, I wish there was something that we could say this was a matter of substance, but I don't really see any real substance. I mean, Israel just got $8 billion just a few days ago, another push of $8 billion. So I don't think we're seeing any serious change whatsoever yet. And I think we know historically that when these major shifts occur, they suddenly occur, and it's one day things go one way, and the next day suddenly everything's going in the other direction, and you don't always know exactly what button it was that was pushed. But we know that we need to push every button, and we need to push as hard as we can all the time in order to change this equation. So it may well be, this president, where during whose term Palestine is liberated. Who knows? Because when it changes across the board. So of course our hopes is that it happens as soon as humanly possible. But I don't really see, I don't really believe that the ethnic cleansing of Gaza is a Trump idea. This is an idea that he read from a paper given to him by Netanyahu, who was sitting right next to him. This is paid back for God knows how many 100 million, or how much money he received from Zionists here in this country. But this is, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza is a Zionist. It's a dream. It's been a dream for decades upon decades upon decades. I mean, since the Gaza Strip concentration camp was established by Israel, and pretty much as soon as Israel was established as a state, they've been dreaming of a day where they would wake up and there'd be no Palestinians in that space. And suddenly an American president is willing to say this out loud and to pretend like there's some kind of a plan for it. So I think they're hoping that this will somehow turn into a reality. I don't believe it will. I don't think anybody is even if it would, I don't think anybody's in a position to take 2 million people and remove them, and certainly not the Palestinian people in Gaza.
And what about the long talked about objective of Israel's government, Netanyahu, attacking Iran and destroying whatever nuclear program exists there? Is it your sense there in Washington that this is something that the Trump administration might be amenable to facilitating or carrying out, or do you think that's something that Trump desperately wants to avoid?
I think if there was a sense that, let me put it this way. I believe both the U.S. and Israel know that fully attacking Iran would be suicidal for both Israel and for the United States. Had that not been the case, they would have attacked Iran a long time ago. And so I think there's nothing they fear more than a full-out war with Iran. And thankfully, the Iranians have been quite responsible in their response to the Israeli and American aggression over the years. But there's no question that the people in charge, both in Washington and in Tel Aviv, know that they need to avoid attacking Iran as much as possible, because it would be catastrophic for them. Nobody can attack Iran and then succeed until and succeed. That's not. I don't think anybody believes that.
Right. And finally, Miko, now in your new position, I'm interested in your views as to what it is that we, as members of civil society living in the West, what do you think we should be focusing our efforts upon? You talked about pushing every button. I'm sure BDS is a very important part of that equation. Political advocacy, campaigning for political candidates who care sincerely about the Palestinian cause and the human rights of the Palestinian people. Is it sort of all of the above, or do you think that there are certain things that we as members of civil society in the West should be focusing upon in order to achieve sooner rather than later the liberation of the Palestinian people?
I'd say that first and foremost, we need to push for a reality where supporting Zionism, there's no tolerance for Zionism. But supporting Zionism is unacceptable. But if you as a politician, and again, talking about the West where people vote for their representatives, if a representative shows even the smallest sign of supporting Israel or identifying with Zionism, that would be, a death sentence to their career. Their career would be over. That's where we need to be. We need to be in a position where we don't see a particular athlete or a particular team in a sporting event refuse to compete with an Israeli team. The Israeli team should not be allowed in the Olympics. They should be banned from FIFA. It has to be. That's what we need to push for. It's not so much about a particular candidate or a particular bill. It's about an overwhelming, a complete change, a complete shift across the board. The Olympic Committee must understand that allowing a team from Israel is not acceptable, not tolerated. Same thing with academic, with cultural, any spaces, and certainly diplomatic. There should be no tolerance in any space to representatives of the apartheid state. They should be completely banned and kicked out from every space whatsoever. And that's the BDS part. I mean, people think of BDS as, not buying Israeli avocados or something. I'm talking about Israel needs to be banned from all of these spaces in a big way. That's how Palestine will be free. And then, of course, politicians need to understand if they show support for the apartheid state, they will lose their job. It'll be the end of their careers. That's what we should be pushing across the board in every country, in every society. And that's what needs to happen for Palestine to be free.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much, Miko. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and I wish you the very best in your new endeavor.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris from Kalamata, Greece on March 4th, 2025.